Hi, I'm really pleased to be here and thank Charlotte and Rachel for the invitation to address you all this evening. I know a lot of what I'm going to say here will be very familiar to Ken, other senior staff and scholars here, and also to a lot of students and early career researchers that are watching. And indeed, the issues might be more obvious to a lot of students and early career researchers. But in the interest of starting the discussion, I'm going to do what Charlotte and Rachel asked, which is talk about provenance and by extension, not only what is it, but why it matters. The context of my interest is our ARC project on fake papyri, see at forgingantiquity.com, in the context of which we not only work on fake papyri, but ran an exhibition in 2008 with an associated conference, Faking It. And our Faculty of Arts research stream, in which Rachel, Ewan Coleridge, and I are amongst the leaders, Markers of Authenticity, as part of which we have an ethics policy which guides our work. I'm not going to go into it there, but at markersofauthenticity.com/ethics, you can see our own ethics policy. I raise that because when we talk about provenance and when we discuss what it is, we signal a discussion about a wide range of related areas, but all revolve around how we practice the study of the past, and in particular, how we do so ethically. So if we ask what is provenance, we firstly have to disambiguate it from other terms which we use to describe the life cycle of an object, such as provenience. Provenance and provenience are often treated as basically dialectal variants or as synonyms, but it's important that they, even though they in some disciplines have been in the past, it's important that they be disambiguated so that we can talk in simple terms about the ancient history of an object, that is, where it was found or its place of final deposition, and the collection or ownership history, the modern history of an object. And so if we think about provenance as the modern history of an object and provenience as the ancient history of an object, then that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Now you can see that if we talk about provenance as the whole collection history of an object, then that can actually include its provenience, because it can be from its creation to where it was taken, to where it was used, and then finally deposited and buried, and then when it was found, and then the modern history of the object again after that. Generally, people would reserve provenance for the collection history after an object is rediscovered, but in strict terms, it can actually run right back to its creation. The chief problem in discussing this is that different disciplines have used these terms in different ways. And that includes, of course, domains beyond ancient world studies, such as art history and book history, or indeed geology. Archaeologists in general have been much more attuned to these issues, and much more attuned to the need to differentiate between provenance and provenience, and to stress the importance of knowing provenience. This can sometimes have the effect of causing a blind spot where the degree to which their own discipline is deeply implicated in the problematic modern history of ancient world studies is subsumed in a dichotomous positioning of provenienced objects relative to unprovenienced ones. But leaving that aside, as a guild, archaeologists are nevertheless responsible for upholding the distinction between these terms. Other disciplines, such as history, and particularly the more object-based, text-based philological disciplines, papyrology, epigraphy, cuneiform studies, have been slower to grasp the distinction and slower to even see the necessity of investigating collection history at all. That's been changing in recent years, which is good. And as an example of the confusion, I offer within papyrology the fact that provenance, such as when I was being trained, for instance, and even in places now, was traditionally used to be either the place of writing, the place of finding, or neither. It could be worked out by internal evidence on the papyrus, by external evidence. That external evidence could be either controlled scientific excavation or a vague report of the dealer. Now papyrology is much better about regarding provenance as including and being the modern history, collection history of an object, but that's because the issues come into spotlight. At least papyrology and other disciplines are well equipped for discussions of provenance because they're often interested in the museum archaeology of an object, learning about its collection history. But often papyrologists didn't take the extra step of considering whether anything was wrong if they couldn't find out anything about how the papyrus came to be in a collection. So all that said, and all that different ways of using these terms, provenance is now more commonly used for the modern collection history of an object because it's provenance which is crucial for the antiquities trade, as it's that which safeguards against illicit antiquities. So the principle then of provenance research, and John and Charlotte and others can speak more about this for numismatics, of course, and more about it in particular tonight, is to trace a collection history back to a point when you can be sure that the object is not illicit. That is, that it hasn't been acquired contrary to national laws or international conventions, i.e. that it hasn't been looted. I talk about licit or and illicit rather than legal and illegal, by the way, because that's the standard terminology in these discussions. And if you talk about licit and illicit, it also widens the frame of reference to include ethical concerns. So the tracing of provenance is not just an idle desire to understand how an object made its way to where it is now, but it's a tool to forestall the acquisition of illicit antiquities. So how then should we define licit objects? At what point does an object become licit, and at what point can we consider it legal, in simple terms? Well, this remains up for debate, of course. The 1970 UNESCO Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing the Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property is frequently quoted and is the sort of bedrock point for a lot of peak bodies' conventions or protocols on this issue. But it's often quoted without much reflection on how an item looted in 1969 might be different from one looted in 1973, and often with scant regard for relevant national laws. We'd argue in the Forging Antiquity and Markers of Authenticity teams that the latter must be the bedrock on which our actions are built. And these are frequently simply ignored rampantly in historical terms, such as in the 19th and earlier 20th century, and even now. In Egypt, for example, there's been laws that have interdicted in one sense or another the export of antiquities since the 1830s, but huge amounts of material have been taken openly from Egypt up until recently. Of course, a large number of what I regard as relatively intellectually barren arguments are frequently mounted on why objects are better off in some Western countries. I'm not going to discuss them at all here, other than to say that I don't really accept any of them. That's not being uncompromising. I've thought about them a lot. I just don't accept them, and I think a lot of people in this Zoom won't either. People who argue that an object was acquired legally without considering the ethics of the situation, I would say, are falling short of the self-reflection required in this situation. That sometimes something has an ethical as well as a legal dimension, and it's critical to consider the ethical aspect. Just because something's legal doesn't make it right. All this is to say that close attention to provenance is necessary to avoid participation in the trade in illicit antiquities. And it's important here to understand that provenance is and has been and continues to be faked, excuse me, just as often as antiquities themselves have been. Indeed, it's almost easier to fake provenance than it is to fake an artifact. In fact, it's a lot easier, of course, because you don't need to start getting papyrus and mixing up ancient ink or anything like that, because of the way provenance is often assessed, including by the biggest auction houses, the behavior of some of which, and even in the most recent times, is quite shameful in this regard. That is, a cursory investigation, which is abandoned once nothing is found to conflict excuse me, with the scanty information provided to begin with. So we would say that this needs to be reversed, and the burden of proof needs to be on confirming the licit nature of the object beyond doubt. Lack of or cursory provenance or cursory investigation of provenance that's provided allows fakes to circulate, but it also allows recently looted items to circulate as if they were licit. And this is so common that it's naive to argue it doesn't occur. So, provenance understood as the collection and ownership history of an object and the proper investigation of it is the vital tool in preventing any collector, be they an institution or a private individual, from participating in and thus further enabling the trade in illicit antiquities. Genuine antiquities can have fake provenance, and fakes, of course, by definition, have fake provenance. Provenance research in and of itself doesn't provide a guarantee of authenticity or forgery, but it can be a, and sometimes the, crucial point in that discussion, and should always be the first thing discussed about an object. As a cautionary tale, I show you here, I don't know quite how to get this off the top of the screen now, but I show you here 3 papyri recently discussed within papyrology. At the left is a brilliant new book by Ariel Sabar that mentions them all. The top is the Gospel of Jesus' Wife, fake papyrus with fake provenance, quite elaborately fake provenance. In the middle, fake fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls owned by the Museum of the Bible, fake parchment with very cursory and uninvestigated, fake, basically invented one-line provenance. At the bottom, a genuine papyrus of the Gospel of Mark from the 2nd or 3rd centuries, stolen from the Egypt Exploration Society collections in Oxford and offered, and indeed sold, attempted to be sold to the Museum of the Bible with a variety of fake provenances invented for it. Those are just cursory cautionary tales and what happens if you don't investigate provenance properly. Now, John and Charlotte are going to talk more on coins, so let me just say a few things about coins from an outsider perspective. And here, please correct me if I'm wrong, because most of the people in this Zoom know a lot more than I do. But it seems to me that arguments have been repeatedly made that coins stand apart from other antiquities and shouldn't be covered by laws or conventions on cultural heritage. It seems to me that most, if not all, of those arguments are special pleading and don't have as much force as those making them think they might. There's a number of noted apologists who are very regularly active in discussions about cultural heritage in online fora, and it's notable that a lot of them are numismatists. It seems that a desire for continued unfettered collections often goes hand in hand with a distrust of multilateral institutions and a hostility to the idea that there should be any check on the inalienable right to possess whatever one wants, or the simple desire to keep collecting, buying, and selling. As I say, some of the arguments that are made, which I won't iterate here because of time, but we can discuss them if it comes up afterwards, of course. A lot of the arguments seem to be special pleading, but it's also important because coins are amongst the most prized items by looters, because they can fetch good value, obviously, if they're gold coins or precious metals, but also they're very easily transportable. They're very easily able to be slipped into another lot to allow to be covered by some licit provenance and some other sale. And so, owing in no small part to the arguments by dealers and collectors, they're a lot more easily sold as well. So I'd submit, therefore, that this discussion is of particular relevance in numismatics. I'm very pleased to see it discussed in this forum, and I look forward to the discussions that we're going to have afterwards. And I thank once again everyone involved in NUMISMA for inviting me to participate tonight. Thank you.